At the end of the championship game last year in the NFC, we saw Dan Campbell saying it's going to be very difficult for them to get to the same point again without, if you take into account injuries potentially happening and teams wanting to beat you. Now, we know that the Detroit Lions are an extremely good team this year, but now they are starting to succumb to injuries. If you look at that defensive side of the ball, they are completely and utterly decimated.
Looks insane.
You look at it, you've got Aiden Hutchinson, you've got Aleem McNeil now gone, David Barter, Nate Lynn, Carl Becker, Mecca Wingo, Alec Anzalone, Colton Davis is gone. You just all the depth in
in all three levels of that defense. Catastrophic.
And then they've added some injuries on the offensive side of the ball now, with David Montgomery, part of their two-headed back system, now out for the rest of the year. Now, I know that Greg Reynolds is good enough to fit into that system, but can the Detroit Lions overcome the defensive injuries? Because we saw that against the Buffalo Bills, they had to try and put up numbers. Now, because the defense could not stop anything. And when you look at the playoffs, when the playoffs come around, you don't want to have to boat race teams. You don't want to have to effectively score a ridiculous amount of points every single game to win. You want to control it. Now, do you think they're going to be able to do that, guys? Peter, I'm going to ask you first because you're a big, hot on defense kind of guy. Do you think the Lions can overcome all those injuries, or do you think it's just going to be one too many?
I think it will be one too many for the Detroit Lions, as much as I would have loved them to be able to overcome it. But then if there's any team in the NFL that have the capability to do so, it will be the Detroit Lions. But I think it's just one too many, especially when they lost their leader, their alpha dog at the beginning of the year in Aiden Hutchinson. So that's a big blow. And then when it gets to the playoffs, those type of injuries starts to count. So I feel like it's just kind of like one too many, especially the loss of certain key players that are very essential to how the Lions operate as a team, both on offense and defense, especially the losses that they've had on defense. Is devastating. I think they've had an outstanding season, but the Super Bowl aspirations are definitely fading with the amount of injuries that they've had so far. They're just becoming one.
We've seen that the pass rush obviously has lacked, obviously since Aiden Hutchinson went out. And then if you look at it, the mantle kind of for like the defensive leader, kind of like one of the... Aleem McNeil had really started to step it up these last few weeks, being a bit of a game destroyer, and now he's on IR.
Yep.
And that's on the interior side as well. And he's played at a very high level. And I don't see it. Will, do you think they're going to be able, if they come up against your Eagles in the playoffs, do you think your offense is just going to be able to have their way with that defense because there's nobody left?
If any team can do it, it's probably Detroit. They're a team that top to bottom is pretty much like a mindset and a style of play. Like I've honestly thought, I mean, obviously up until the injuries, I think they've been the most complete team in football.
Yeah.
That all phases of the ball they can perform. And that usually doesn't happen unless their depth is where it needs to be. I'm pretty sure the coaching doesn't drop off. So we should be able to see that they ideally, like a good roster, when you build a good NFL team, you prepare for situations like this. Maybe not on this scale, with like everything being in the red with regards to players, but you do make sure that your number 2 and 3 are ready to go if their number's called. So I think naturally there is going to be a drop off. You can't replace some of these guys and their ability to create opportunities on the field, but I don't think it's going to be as catastrophic of a drop off because, like I said, Detroit are a culture, they're a mindset. Like I actually coined this phrase So I've been saying this in light of how like my Eagles have been performing recently. I say when you go into the playoffs, you want your team to be playoff ready. You kind of want it to be Wolverine with the claws out. You don't want it to be Old Man Logan. So this is what they are. Like, even with their backs against the wall, I think they're going to bite and scratch. They're going to claw their way through. And I think that's probably when they're
The claws
most
have been chopped
dangerous.
off.
I
Well,
know. But what I'm saying is they're not going to be as vulnerable as you think. They're still going to play hard. It's still going to be a hard game. They're
all the
just not
adamant.
going to have, they're not going to have the
What
opportunity.
is the metal that Wolverine got given? Is it adamant? How do you say it?
Adamantium, yeah, adamantium.
All the adamantium is gone. Basically, they're just left with the physical claws. There's
Yeah,
no adamantium on
Wolverine
there.
can still do some
But
damage. Like, he can still
okay, so
make a few
if we
taps on the way
if
out.
we look at who we think potentially is going to be in the NFC side of the playoffs, right? Eagles, Commanders, Lions, Vikings, Packers. What somebody in the NFC West? At the moment, the most likely is the Rams. Most likely, because just they're on like a very good vein of form, right?
Yeah, based on the experience and stuff,
Yeah,
things like that.
and then in the NFC South, probably the Bucks, but it could be the Falcons.
I mean, if you look at the picture of the NFC, the only two teams that I've seen can still beat the Lions, or has the edge now that the Lions have these significant defensive injuries,
I
your
would say that,
Eagles,
yeah, and I think the Rams are
Vikings.
dangerous. The Rams are dangerous because they just know how to beat teams.
I mean, they're peaking at the right time, or they're.
I mean, they know how
they're
to
on the ridge vein of form. That's what it is.
they
You
know
know,
how
they
to beat teams,
See
but
guys at the hand.
the only thing is that they'll be suspect to the Lions' run game. The Lions have a very strong run game, even without David Montgomery, and the Rams, the run games, their run defense isn't,
isn't the best. Yeah,
exactly. So the Lions could get them on that in terms of that. Even though the Rams are a dangerous team, as I've acknowledged, but I do believe that the strongest teams, and I think they might prove too much for the Lions with their injuries, is the Vikings and the Eagles, essentially.
and
And
the Vikings,
always
and the Vikings have the
sometimes.
ability to shoot themselves in the foot as well. They have this innate ability, even though they're 12-2, they make it look like they want to try and lose a game.
But Cardinals should have beaten them. We let them off the hook.
Now, like, I think the Lions are still probably going to go deep in the playoffs because they're still able to sling the rock, right? Jared Goff threw for over 500 yards this last game, so he's able to still push the ball down the field. Offensively, they've got the pieces available still to them, but it's just whether the defense can hold on because they still have elite players, but it's not well rounded, right, as what they were. So
yeah, and I gotta say, even though they've had all this injuries significant, they won't go down easy. I mean, even if they're playing the Vikings or the Eagles, it will be a tough game for the Eagles to win eventually, but they will give everything that they've got.
Well, we're going to enjoy the ride because the Lions are an extremely fun team to watch. Please drop a comment down below as to what you think the injury situation will do to the Lions' Super Bowl hopes. And let's enjoy the ride because they're going to bite some kneecaps whilst they're at it, aren't they?